first.
It's life's biggest mystery.
When they got to me, I was dead.
What happens when we die?
I felt like I was being sucked through outer space.
Some people claim to know.
I noticed a light.
I seen my mother and my daddy.
It still sends shivers up my spine.
It's just kind of like a Twilight Zone moment.
But these powerful stories have also sparked intense debate.
People just think you're crazy.
Death is irreversible.
And the answers could transform everything we know about death.
Will have profound implications for every single person on Earth.
I can't hardly tell you without crying.
My God, it was incredible. Prior to the accident, I had never heard of a near-death experience, really. When I thought about death or dying, it was always a kind of a fear of what would happen and where you would go.
Michaela Rosser is lucky to be alive. On July 3rd, 1994, she nearly died in a horrific car accident when she was just 17.
The day of the accident, we were coming home from vacation. It was a beautiful day. We were probably about 20 minutes from home.
We were driving up a hill following a cattle truck. And it was going very slow, so my mother had put her four-way flashers on. As we went up the hill, a 16-year-old girl was driving up behind us, and she went to pass us. When she saw some traffic coming, she swerved in, hit us from behind, 80 miles an hour. Our car continued underneath the cattle truck, and it drug us for about a football field in length. And the seat went up and the roof came down, and we cracked our heads off of the ceiling.
I thought that was it. I thought we were just going to be decapitated.
Dr. Scott Magley was one of the first responders on the scene.
Michaela was unconscious. The metal around her was so bent and deformed you couldn't get where Michaela was sitting. I wasn't even sure if she was breathing. When I finally got Michaela into the ambulance, you could see the severity of her head injury. You could see her skull showing through. I needed to put a tube down into her windpipe to breathe for her. Michaela's blood pressure was so unstable that the paramedics were unable to get an intravenous line in her arm. I had to put needles into her chest as well as into her groin and attempt to bring her blood pressure back up to normal. With a low blood pressure and her breathing at 2 to 3 breaths per minute, she could die at any moment. I put Michaela into the helicopter and flew to the trauma center.
I believe that the near-death experience happened to me en route to the hospital while I was on the helicopter. Everything was black at first. All of a sudden, I was just held by this unbelievable presence. It was a white, peaceful, tranquil light that just embraced me. I couldn't see a face or a physical form of who was holding me, but I knew that it was someone that loved me, and I knew that it was someone I could trust. I guess I would say God. I'd think of a question and the answer was already there. There was just this all-knowingness about the experience that you understood you're part of the grand design. Probably the best feeling that I've ever felt in my life was in my death. They say your life flashes before your eyes, and that happened to me, but it wasn't anything like I had ever imagined it to be. All these flashes all at once, so rapidly. When I was a little girl, dancing and singing, playing Ring Around the Rosie, being disciplined by my parents. Things in the present of all the stuff that was happening with the accident. also seeing into my future and seeing me with my grandchildren, the past, present, and future all at the same time, just bombarding me. And I realized if I went to this other place, I would be fine. I would still be. I just would never be able to have this life and live this life in this body or this form ever again. Immediately started fighting and crying and begging God, please God, I don't want to die, I don't want to die. And then all at once, I felt like I was being sucked through outer space. And then there I was, up in the corner of my hospital room, watching my body just laying there in the bed. And I realized that I made it. I'm back.
The events Michaela describes may seem remarkable, but they're similar to ones shared by thousands of near-death survivors.
There's something going on with near-death experiences that we don't understand and we can't explain with any of our current medical and scientific knowledge about physiology or psychology.
Dr. Kevin Nelson disagrees. He believes the dramatic visions Michaela and others experience in moments of trauma have nothing to do with death and are actually more like dreams brought on by severe drops in blood pressure.
Death is irreversible. There's no coming back from physical death. We have a switch deep in our brain that determines whether or not we are in wakefulness or we're in REM sleep. During the low blood pressure, some people have a propensity to having that REM switch triggered, and this can be associated with visual hallucinations. You're not asleep, you're actually awake, but you get aspects of REM that can intrude during this time of crisis.
Most of us have had dreams and understand the sense of unreality, how events in the dreams skip around and how the dreams are quickly forgotten. That has nothing to do with the near-death experience.
People's hallucinations are different. In terms of people who've died, there is a universal experience that takes place. And so I wouldn't define it as a hallucination because it seems to be real for everybody.
But Michaela's own experience was far from over. As she hovered between life and death in the ICU, something else was about to happen. Something even harder to explain.
My mom said, how do you know that? And I was like, I was there.
I know sometimes people are skeptical. There was no other explanation for it.
Michaela Rosser was in extremely grave condition following the car accident that nearly claimed her life. By the time she was medevaced to a nearby shock trauma center, the 17-year-old had slipped into a deep coma. But surprisingly, her extraordinary near-death experience didn't end there. In fact, it would soon take on a bizarre new twist that's even harder to explain.
I was watching from above and realized I could go in and out, and I had control. And I would go in my body, and then it would be too much pain, and I couldn't take it. And so I would jump back out. I remember starting to go to different rooms. While I was in a coma, my body was lying on the bed. I was out watching the nurses do their thing. I even overheard a conversation that my mom and dad were having with my grandmothers in the hospital cafeteria.
We were in the cafeteria, so we were all sitting and eating. And after lunch, my husband stood up and said he was going to go have a cigarette.
And he went to leave, and my grandmother, who has never had a cigarette in her life, said, I need one too.
And then my mother-in-law said, yeah, it sounds pretty good.
Everyone kind of started laughing. After my accident, I ran into my mom and dad's room, and I said, Mom, when I was in a coma in the hospital, were you and Dad and Graham and Grandma downstairs in the cafeteria?
Word for word, the conversation that my husband, my mother, and my mother-in-law and I had.
My mom said, how do you know that? And I was like, I was there.
I know sometimes people are skeptical, and probably at first I had a little bit of skepticism too. But in her talking about her experiences, what she saw, what she was able to know, there was no other explanation for it. other than she did have this out-of-body experience.
Out-of-body experiences are an illusion. They feel very real, but they're not. They're an illusion.
Michaela's blow-by-blow description of her family's conversation may seem almost impossible to account for. But researchers like Dr. Nelson believe it's simply a matter of her unconscious mind continuing to absorb and process information in the wake of the trauma.
I am sure they had conversations about what happened to her in the hospital while she was in the hospital. There may be little sidebars, little snippets of conversation here and there that get incorporated into the memory.
Many experts agree it is possible Michaela could have sensed and formed memories about the world around her while in a coma. But it's harder to imagine how she could have recounted the conversation so precisely, particularly given the extent of her injuries.
When you have any kind of insult, any kind of event that takes place in the brain, people tend to have what's called an acute confusional state. So your brain circuits aren't working very well, and so you're not able to form memories properly.
There's no explanation for how people can have not only a lucid, organized, conscious experience during a near-death experience, but have so much lucid, organized, conscious experience in such a short time span.
It took about 13 years for me to really understand and accept the experience as it was. At first, it was very scary to talk to people about it because people just think you're crazy or they think you're making it up. It doesn't matter what any science can prove. They can't take that experience away from me. Before the accident, I was a little hesitant to try certain things or to put myself out there. I really, truly thank God every day for letting this happen to me because it helped me to motivate myself to do the things that I wanted to do and accomplish the things I wanted to accomplish in my life. It also gives me an inspiration to go out and connect with others and try to help others find their happiness. It's changed my life forever.
Doug Taylor was also transformed by his moment of death and the strange and tragic coincidence that it revealed.
They believe I had been dead somewhere between 3 and 5 minutes.
Under any circumstances, that's an extraordinary story.
I didn't always believe in the tunnel of light and people waiting for you on the other side, but after being dead for somewhere between 3 and 5 minutes, that definitely changed.
Doug Taylor was a prominent stage actor in Austin, Texas, when a powerful near-death experience totally transformed his life. His encounter is rather typical at first glance, but a tragic coincidence involving his grandfather baffles experts to this day.
Sunday morning, got up, took a hot bath, got my dirty clothes together, got my quarters lined up to go and do my laundry, and I started to feel bad. It was just a weird feeling across my shoulders and down into my arm. I had no idea that I was having a heart attack. I was 39 years old. I was holding the phone in my hand, trying to dial 911. I do not remember dialing 911. I just remember the phone falling out of my hand. The 911 operator answered. She got no response, so she called the fire department, which luckily is 2.5 blocks from my house. The door was locked and they had to bust it down.
Stop breathing.
When they got to me, I was dead.
Dr. Michael Watkins was the emergency cardiologist on duty.
They sent the first responders there who attached the AED, the automatic external defibrillator.
Analyzing. Clear.
And the device shocked him 5 times.
Clear. Ready to go. Take the arm.
Following that, the paramedics arrived. They intubated him, which means putting a tube in his trachea and his windpipe to breathe for him. And then they shocked him, I believe, 5 more times.
while paramedics desperately tried to bring Doug back to life. 300 miles away, his grandfather was having a major crisis of his own. In a tragic coincidence, he suffered a severe heart attack at almost the exact same moment.
He always expected me home at a certain time, and I was a little later than normal getting home. And when I walked in the door, he was lying on the floor.
Meanwhile, back in Austin, Doug was quickly slipping into what can only be described as another reality.
Well, I didn't see the tunnel of light that everyone talks about. I just saw an expanse of white. I wasn't afraid of anything. It was just, well, this is strange. To my right, there was a shadow of an oak tree and people standing underneath it. So I went that way. And as I got closer, I recognized the people standing towards the front. My Uncle Glenn and my Aunt Lala and my grandmother. There must have been 20, 25 people there. And I asked everybody the same thing. What am I doing here? Where are we? And the only thing they would say to me is, we're not waiting for you. Go home. The last conscious memory I had on that side was of my grandfather's voice. I felt his presence, but I didn't see him. And I heard him say, "You're the luckiest boy I know."
Doug arrived at the hospital in extremely critical condition. 2 of the 3 arteries to his heart were almost entirely blocked.
When I first saw Doug at the hospital, he of course was in ICU. He was dead white, he had no color at all. I realized I had to call his family.
300 miles away, Doug's mother Glynis was in another hospital tending to her father, who in a shocking twist had just suffered a heart attack himself.
My sister and I were in ICU with my father, and my niece came in and she said, Aunt Glynis, there's someone on the phone for you. And something about Doug had a heart attack. And I said, oh, Pam, they just are confused with your grandfather and Uncle Doug. And she said, I don't think so.
Well, I'm sorry, but they both had a heart attack.
It was a very hard time. It was hard to leave my father, but I had to be with my son, only 39 years old and having a heart attack. Shortly after that, my sister called to tell me that my father had passed away. And I thought, you know, is this going to be Doug's fate too? You know, am I going to lose both of them at the same time?
After 2 major heart surgeries, Doug remained in critical condition. 3 days later, he finally regained consciousness.
He opened his eyes and we were so excited. Then he wanted to know, how's Gaga? It is a little unusual that he would ask me about his grandfather every time I went in there. And I said, oh, he's okay, because the doctor said, do not tell him. So we had to wait, and we didn't tell him until Thursday morning.
I didn't put it all together until my mother told me Gaga had died. It came back to me what they said, we're not waiting for you, go home. They weren't waiting for me. They were waiting for my grandfather. I was coming back, and he was going home. It still sends shivers up my spine.
The story of Doug Taylor's near-death experience is mystifying on many levels. How could he possibly have formed any memories after such a sudden, massive heart attack? A period when he was literally dead for several minutes.
These data that we have from cardiac arrest is very clear. There is no electrical activity of the brain within about 10 seconds on average of the heart stopping. And so one of the most important questions that we are now facing is, what actually happens to the human mind and consciousness after the heart stops? Because we know from numerous studies that we can bring people back to life again, and then mind and consciousness is still present.
What's even more astounding is that there's no way Doug could have known his grandfather had a fatal heart attack at nearly the exact same moment as his own.
Under any circumstances, that's an extraordinary story.
But Dr. Kevin Nelson believes there's always a possible physiological explanation. He thinks the entire encounter could have been manufactured in Doug's brain by the same complex dreaming mechanisms that produced Michaela Roser's vivid out-of-body experience.
Could his mother have come from her father's side, rushed to her son, and simply had a conversation with the medical personnel while he was, in fact, unresponsive but conscious? And I don't think near-death experiences are dreams. I think what they do is evoke the dreaming mechanism while we're awake and at a time when we're in crisis.
I have told this story to every single person that I have had more than 5 minutes interaction with. I think it's important. I think people need to know that there is a life after this one, that you go on to do other and better things. Before my near-death experience, I had a short temper, and I mean short. And now I have no temper at all. It's hard for me to express the warmth, the love, the understanding that I felt, so people walk away from that conversation I have with them going, wow, that's what I want to happen to me. That's where I want to go.
Doug's strange encounter with his grandfather coincided with him flatlining for over 3 minutes. But near-death experiences don't always begin with a death.
There was a feeling of impending doom. Personally, I was not religious. I was so skeptical of near-death experiences prior to the accident. I'm sure I would have come up with some sort of a scientific explanation, but it's hard to do that now.
In the spring of 2003, Mary Jo Rapini was working as a psychotherapist in Lubbock, Texas. She never believed stories of near-death experiences, even though she'd counseled dozens of terminally ill cancer patients who claimed they were real.
Before they would die, they would grab my arm and say, "Mary Jo, can you see them? Can you see them?" And I would not even look up. I would just say, "No, I don't see them."
But on the morning before Easter Sunday, those doubts would be erased forever.
I was going to have a big dinner at my house, so I had 1,000 things I had to do. I was off, and I went to the gym. I'm feeling good. I'm gonna get on that PEC machine. I pushed this one machine to my max. I felt a pop, and the pop was in the back of my head, and I went, oh my God, I think I broke my neck. There was a feeling of impending doom. This big guy that I always like, he goes, "Hey, muscle woman, what's the matter?" And I said, "You run up to the front and call an ambulance. I think I broke my neck." I was terrified.
I was getting my hair cut, and they called me to go to the emergency room and said, your wife's had an accident and you need to go to the emergency room. A neurosurgeon came in later, and he put this CT scan up on the monitor, and he says, there's blood in the brain. And, it was just like unreal to me, I mean, you could see it there, and there's quite a lot of it.
Mary Jo had suffered a subarachnoid hemorrhage, and while the diagnosis was serious, her doctors remained hopeful that they could avoid a high-risk operation. But 4 days after entering the hospital, Mary Jo's oxygen levels plummeted. Suddenly, emergency brain surgery was her only option.
I was lying there, and I knew there was a lot of hustling and bustling around me. I sensed that things were very serious now. And I was having moments where I would kind of go out of my body and then come back. It wasn't scary. I would just go out, and I was kind of observing what people were doing, and then I would come back.
Come on, wake up. You hear me? Good, not your eyes.
All of a sudden, I noticed a light, and it was quite small. And then I said, I wonder if that's that tunnel that the cancer patients used to tell me about. But I wasn't scared. It was like I was cognizant. I was evaluating. And then all of a sudden that grew and it got huge. And I was in it. It was so warm and it was so comforting. It was full of love and not a human love. People talk about unconditional love. It doesn't really exist, but it existed there. It was total, absolute love and peace. My God, it was incredible. And then I came out into a space, into a room. It had a pinkish tinge to it, but it was very bright. And God was holding me. I remember he had me in his arms and he spoke to me, but I didn't use my ears like I used them on earth. It came in through me, through my skin and through my whole body. It called me by name. It said, Mary Jo, you cannot stay. And I said, I can't stay. I was upset. I started telling God every human reason I could stay. And then he said to me, well, let me ask you one question. Have you ever loved another person the way you've been loved here? And I said, no, it's impossible. I'm a human. It felt like a warm, loving, kind of chuckle, like it's somebody that loves you and it's embracing you, and it said, you can do better. I don't remember leaving God. I don't remember going backward through the tunnel. I woke up and my husband is shaking me and he's crying, Mary, Mary, stay with me. And then he said, Mary, we've got to go through all these forms.
I was trying to do what we physicians call informed consent and inform her about all the things that could happen.
And I go, Ron, just do what you have to do.
Somehow or other, she was at peace with it and she didn't care. She wanted me to call the shots.
And he goes, but Mary, you have to care. You have to want to come back to me. And I said, I'm not going to die. I just talked to God.
Mary Jo is extremely fortunate. Her doctors were able to find and fix a small aneurysm, and she recovered without any permanent brain damage. Despite the fact that the 43-year-old never flatlined, her experience isn't uncommon.
The name near-death experience means that you nearly died. If you're unconscious, if you're comatose, if your physical condition doesn't get better, you're going to die permanently. No doubt about it, when you start having lucid, organized, and the dramatic events typical of near-death experiences, it is a near-death experience.
Neurologists like Kevin Nelson agree that Mary Jo may well have undergone an experience similar to individuals who've suffered full cardiac arrest. But they maintain it's all part of the same biological response, and it doesn't require a supernatural explanation.
Most of these are brought on when the brain is impaired, usually by low blood pressure. It actually isn't the brain that fails first, it's the eyes. And the vision fails from peripheral to central, so there is the creation of tunnel vision with low blood pressure.
This complex process doesn't just produce the illusion of tunnel vision. Dr. Nelson believes it triggers other systems deep in our brains, capable of producing the powerful sense of well-being that Mary Jo and others describe.
One of the things that's underappreciated is the fact that the REM system is tightly linked to our reward system. The system that makes heroin, sex, and food so pleasurable has its links with the REM system as well. And then you take that and you engage the dreaming mechanism while you're awake. What kind of narrative do you think would come from that? They feel greatly euphoric. And you're feeling greatly euphoric in the context of dying.
The dream won't affect my life for the rest of my life. And this changed everything in my life. I felt guilty about how inadequate I was with trying to help cancer patients go to God. I'm much different now. I'm very spiritual. I don't doubt the experience, but I doubt more what I'm doing with it at times. I'm thinking this vision is going to empower a lot of people and touch a lot of people, but is it enough?
While accounts of near-death and out-of-body experiences are far from rare, they're seldom easy to verify. But the extraordinary case of Jerry Baldwin may be harder than most to explain away.
I don't want to use the word spooky, but I guess that's the word I'm going to use because it's just kind of like a Twilight Zone moment.
Before I had my near-death experience, I had never read one. I never heard anybody talk about one. If somebody had told me about it, I would probably told them it was crazy.
In fact, Jerry Baldwin could have never imagined the extraordinary chain of events that would change his life forever. He was only 47 years old in the fall of 1993 when he decided to take an early retirement from his job as a master mechanic.
I was kind of on the heavy-set side, but I had lost about 100 pounds and thought I was doing great, you know, but I smoked real heavy, about 2.5 packs a day. The morning when I got up, I had a few things I knowed I needed to do, and that's when my problem started. My arms started getting numb, and I thought, well, you know, I don't feel real good. So being a smoker, I thought, well, if I sit down and smoke me a cigarette, everything will be fine. I started having kind of a tightness. I got up, put the cigarette out, and I came up the 2 steps and got right inside. And all of a sudden, it felt like 6 elephants got right in the middle of my chest, and they just wouldn't get off. And I hit the floor.
We received a call that there was a chest pain. Arrived on the scene. Jerry was laying on the couch. And then we started working on him, giving him oxygen, putting him on a cardiac monitor, starting IVs, things like that. We talked to him and kind of got a sense of what was going on, what happened.
I started having a feeling that I wasn't going to make it. Everything started getting kind of gray. I said, I'm fixing to leave you. And he said, what do you mean? I said, I'm fixing to die. And those are the last words to come out of my mouth.
Jerry? Jerry, hello, Jerry?
At that time, he arrested, he went unconscious and unresponsive.
I don't have a pulse. Okay, let's go ahead and move him down to the ground.
One of the things that you do to a patient is you give them what we call a precordial thumb. So my partner reared back with a clenched fist and hit him in the chest a couple of 3 times. Once that didn't work, we got the paddles out, put the chest pads on him so we could defibrillate him.
And then all of a sudden, it just went totally black. I mean, I was gone. I had the most peaceful feeling come over me I've ever had in my life. You know, I had no fear whatsoever. And the next thing I realized, there was no roof on my house anymore. I was floating out of my body, and I just floated up. It seemed like I was 4 or 5 feet above the room. You know, I could just see my wife, she had totally lost it. And my friend Grady, he had run outside. I turned and looked that direction, and I could see outside. There's no windows on that end of the house, so there's no possible way I could see him through a window. I don't know any other way to put it except he was sick and throwing up. And later, when I made it and got home, I told him about it. I told him exactly where he was standing, what he was doing, and he couldn't believe it. And he told me, yes, I was. And I was watching the EMTs work on me. It shocked me the first time with the defibrillators. That didn't get me back. And the second time, they shocked me, and it didn't get me back.
Recharging, clear the patient. I got nothing.
While Steve was trying to charge the paddles up for the 3rd time, the battery went dead in our cardiac monitor, which was nothing unusual. That happened to us on occasion.
Fortunately, help was on the way. A backup team of paramedics was already speeding toward Jerry's home.
I looked to my left, I seen another ambulance coming in. And that was the backup ambulance that brought the other set of paddles. Later, I told them who was driving the ambulance now.
I don't want to use the word spooky, but I guess that's the word I'm going to use because it's just kind of like a Twilight Zone moment.
Jerry was trapped in limbo, and he wasn't sure if the backup paramedics would reach his body in time. But little did he know his extraordinary journey had only just begun.
The next thing I know, head first, I went into that tunnel.
On the day he died, Jerry Baldwin got a whole lot more than he ever bargained for. Hovering above his own house, he witnessed his friend Grady vomiting on the ground. Then he observed blow by blow the paramedics' efforts to revive him, right down to the malfunction of their defibrillator and the arrival of a second ambulance. But that was just the beginning.
I was floating around. I thought, well, are they going to get anything done or not? I really don't care. And about that time, I seen the brightest light. And there was a tunnel. It seemed like it might have been 3 or 4 foot around. And the next thing I know, head first, I went into that tunnel. It seemed like I was going 100 miles an hour. In a little distance out there, I could see the prettiest light you've ever seen. And it was just kept getting brighter and brighter and brighter. And then all of a sudden, I just come out the other end. It was like you jumped in a swimming pool of milk, except it was light. And it just totally surrounded you. But right in the middle of that light was where I heard the voice. Somebody asked me later, how did I know it was God? I said, I just knew. I never seen his face. But the body was so bright. It was like the shape of a body, but it was in this light. And he said, you got to go back. And I said, Lord, don't make me go back. He said, I'll give you a glimpse of what it's like, but you got to go back. And all of a sudden, he grabbed my hand, and we just went through the prettiest gate you've ever seen, and then down by a river. And then I ran up on some people standing by the river, and it was my mother, and my daddy, and my grandmother and them. Everything seemed to be perfect. But they all told me they loved me. And then all of a sudden, just like you snapped your finger, we were somewhere else. And it was the prettiest flowers I've ever seen, the prettiest music you ever heard in your life. I don't have the words in the English language to really tell you the peace and the love that I felt that day. And then all of a sudden, he said, I've showed you, I've got work for you to do. And then when he turned my hand loose, I was just like I was a bullet. I went right back through that tunnel.
About this time, Curtis and Buck, who were another paramedic crew, they came in the door to assist us. And Curtis just placed the paddles on his chest and shocked him. And that immediately brought him back.
They said I was clinically dead for 3.5 to 4 minutes, and it seemed like I was gone 3.5 to 4 months. Time just totally stood still.
Jerry's dramatic story contains several surprising details. How could he have seen his friend Grady from a side of the house with no windows? Or have seen the first set of defibrillators fail and a second team arrive with backup, all while he was clinically dead?
If near-death experiences were dreams, illusionary, or anything other than real conscious observations of their own body, you would expect their observations to be unreal, to be illusionary, dreamlike, but we're not seeing that at all. The overwhelming majority of the observations people make are absolutely accurate, down to the fine details.
Dr. Kevin Nelson disagrees. He believes out-of-body experiences like Jerry's are real memories that are actually manufactured by our brains during and even after a crisis.
With an out-of-body experience, when they're triggered in the laboratory, it's in a region called the temporal parietal area. And we think that that's where the vision, where our position sense is, where we sense our bodies, all that comes together in that region. So if it gets disrupted, then you don't know where you are, and what you will do is reconstruct from memory a visual map.
I think it's a fascinating argument. The problem with it, though, is that people describe events, specific events that took place, say, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, into the process of death. When all our studies tell us the brain has shut down, there's not enough blood flowing into the brain, and they should not be able to gather any information.
As many times I've tried to tell people about it, I can't hardly tell it without crying. I was afraid people think I was crazy. Finally, after 9 years, I told 9 people 1 a year, and all of them was terminally ill. I guess I thought in my mind, it's okay to tell them because they can't stay here and tell anybody I'm crazy anyway because they're dying. And I'll make it so much easier on them. Crossing will be a lot easier. I guess it's sad when God gets to the point with a person that he has to strike you dead to get your attention. But that's what happened to me. I used to be hard-hearted and I always judged people. Now I can't judge people. But it's like a new beginning.
There's no debating the transformative effect of near-death encounters. But debate will most certainly continue over the reality of these experiences until science can provide answers that are accepted by everyone.
I'm not trying to explain these away. I'm trying to explain them because I do believe these are real brain experiences. These are experiences that transform how people live their lives and how they are going to receive death. They are some of the most powerful stories we'll ever hear as human beings. But to take interpretations that are beyond the brain, that's faith. That's not science.
I don't believe that near-death experiences are medically explicable at all. But even if there were a physiologic explanation that actually did account for near-death experience, then you still have this dramatic process that people describe, these dramatic experiences where they're more lucid than their everyday earthly existence. No matter what the cause of near-death experiences, they're still an amazing mystery.
It's nothing like a dream. That was probably the most real thing I've ever experienced in my life, and the most meaningful thing I've ever experienced in my life.
The doctors may have all kinds of answers, and you know what? I'm not a scientist. I can't argue that point. I can tell them what I know happened to me.
There's no doubt that there's chemical changes going on inside your brain when you're going through trauma. But you can't explain that I could go down to the cafeteria and overhear a conversation and be able to describe it word for word.
I'm not sure medical alone can explain it. In fact, the one thing I'm quite sure of is they cannot. I think of my life now as I have an incredible blessing. Prior to this accident, I was very fearful of death. I was terrified of it. I have no fear of death anymore. In fact, I'm quite sure I will embrace it.